Terrific. So as you know, our next two events are both panel discussions. One's now and then another one after lunch. So as I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to invite the members of our next panel, or our first panel, to come on up and take their places here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the details for today. So first of all, no event happens without the dedicated and extremely talented people to help put together all of the plans and execute what really is a seemingly endless list of tasks. So if you would, I don't know if, yes, she is, okay. So please help me to thank my administrative assistant in the IML office, Linda Altpeter, who not only has incredible energy and enthusiasm, but the dedication to make sure that every detail is perfect. So Linda Altpeter. Steve Daniel, who you just saw carrying a microphone around, is the project manager of the Paul R. Judy Center. And he has planned and implemented everything that we've been talking about for the last year to put this together, and many things that you can't see at all. So I know all of our team is just very, very grateful to Steve for his expert leadership. So Steve Daniel. You know, the Paul Judy Center and really the Institute for Music Leadership, which is the parent organization where Judy Center is part of, we just would not have developed without the unique vision and really brilliant leadership of its director emeritus, who brought these programs to their current position of national and international leadership. So would you please help me again to acknowledge and thank the exceptional impact that Ray Ricker has had on Eastman and on our greater musical community through his leadership of the IML. Ray Ricker. So just a little bit of kind of logistics here for you. After this first panel discussion, we're going to adjourn for lunch, and we put in your folders, or I should say Stephen, pardon me, Steve and Linda put in your folders a list of several local restaurants that are within walking distance, and it's not going to rain. There's also one right here within this building, and we'll begin the second panel after this panel is done at 1:30, right here in this same place. And then following that panel, there's a concert with the Eastman Saxophone Project, which is a result of innovative and entrepreneurial thinking of Eastman's professor of saxophone, Chen Quan Lin. So I had no idea what to expect when I went to my first ESP concert. But what I came away with was one of the most profound concert experiences that I'd heard in, well, forever. They performed a self-arranged, memorized, conductorless, complete version of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. If you've not heard it or seen it, it's on YouTube, and you should. So today we'll hear them play selections after that afternoon panel from their recent tour of China, and I know that you're going to enjoy it. But what I do want to tell you, and I'm going to tell you now because I know some people won't be here at the 1:30 panel, but that the concert is registered, pre-registered, and it's full. However, attendees of this conference, you get to go in first. But you need to be there by 3:10, and you need to show them this, and they'll let you in before the mass that will have collected out in the hallway. So unless they physically hold you back, you should be able to get in there first, but you have to be there by 3:10, and then the doors open, and it's first seat for the most quick person to get there. It just so happens, back to Ray Ricker, that he had some pretty good students over the course of his career, including at least 3 who are in this room here today. Steve Daniel is one of them, and I'm another. Chen Quan, actually, so that would be 4th, that you'll hear from later this afternoon. But perhaps the most notable Ray Ricker Studio graduate is the moderator of our first panel. And this panel is titled Igniting Innovation, Supporting Creative Artists and Ensembles. Would you please welcome Jamal Rossi, the Joan and Martin Messinger Dean of the Eastman School of Music.
Well, good morning, everyone. So I have to ask, how many of you are coming back to Rochester? This weather is for you. So, believe it or not, if you weren't here yesterday, it was gorgeous. It was nearly 80. And I had the privilege of attending the dedication of the Hajim Engineering Quadrangle. Ed Hajim just concluded 8 years as the chair of the Board of Trustees at the University of Rochester. His story is truly one of having grown up in foster homes, came to the university as a student with nothing, graduated, went and made a fantastic career, and 8 years ago he gave $30 million to the university. So during his comments, he talked about the fact that, he said, when I got re-engaged with the university, I had a dream of what we could accomplish together. And he went on to describe that dream, which really came to fruition yesterday. I wonder how many of us in this room have a dream. A dream of what we want to accomplish as a musician, as a person, with our ensemble, with our organization. I mean, a real dream of this is what I want that to look like. He did, and then built that over time. The session is titled Igniting Innovation, and when we speak about innovating, I think what we're really talking about is dreaming. I believe dreaming is seeing something as it currently is, or maybe doesn't exist at all, and we dream about what it could be. There's, of course, a very famous quote from Robert Kennedy, who said, "There are those that look at things the way they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not." I think that's the mind of an entrepreneur, of an innovator, of somebody who wants to do something and has in mind what that is. The other quote about that I love comes from Steve Jobs, perhaps the greatest innovator of humankind, who said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." I think our dream as musicians is to enrich the world with music. I think our challenge is to understand how to do that and how to sustain our energies to maximize our impact over an entire career. And I think that's what we're talking about today. In your program booklet for this session, there are 4 objectives that we want to try and cover. The first is that we want to talk about examples of ways that musicians and ensembles have found guidance, funding, tools, and resources to help further their creative projects in today's competitive field. What resources, tools, training, and opportunities are necessary for success. The second was that we want to think about concrete strategies and first steps musicians and ensembles can take to launch their innovative ideas. The third is that we want to explore ideas for how educational institutions and other organizations can nurture innovation and provide opportunities that musicians need in the 21st century. And finally, we want to identify strategies for nurturing the creative and artistic needs of musicians and ensembles in parallel with supporting their career, financial, and logistical needs. We just heard one example of how that is happening at National Sawdust. I am so thrilled that we have an amazing panel of accomplished individuals with us today who are going to talk through these things. I'll ask some questions, but the bulk of this time will be open to you. So we have with us, of course, Paola Prestini, who we just heard from, Jason Price, who is a solo trumpet artist. He's formerly with Alarmo Sound, now at Michigan State University. Peter McDowell is the managing director of 8th Blackbird and the founder of Peter McDowell Arts Consulting. Melissa Snoza, how do I say that?
Snoza.
Snoza, thank you, is a flutist and executive director of Fifth House Ensemble, and Kate Sheeran is the provost and dean of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Won't you join me in welcoming our guests? So friends, to start, in my notes, I had this statement, and I hope it was in your notes. It says, in 1 minute, each panelist explains what they do and how it relates to this panel. So you have 1 minute, not collectively, each. So, Melissa.
Sure. I'm Melissa Snoza, Executive Director and flutist for Fifth House Ensemble. Collaboration is absolutely central to our mission. We do 3 major things. The first is cross-media performances, and we make music with unexpected friends, anywhere from astronomers, graphic novelists, video game designers. We have an album out right now with a Ladino folk band from Israel, all fun things. The second thing is arts integrated education. So we reach 18,000 students a year through that program, and both through classrooms and in social service organizations that reach homeless youth and incarcerated youth. And finally, we do a lot with emerging artist training. So we've partnered with higher education institutions and schools of music as they start to reframe their curriculum, both through short-term residencies and long-term curriculum design partnerships. We also have a festival called Fresh Ink, which we started 5 years ago, where for 2 weeks, emerging artists can come and join us and do everything we do. And we have an alum right here, actually. Hi, Evelyn, nice to see you. And it's been a great way for us to be able to really understand that we had great mentors, so it's our turn to do that as well.
Okay, I'm wearing 2 hats, so 30 seconds each. The first is I'm managing director of 8th Blackbird. It's a sextet formed at Oberlin College 20 years ago, so we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. I've been with 8th Blackbird for 3 years. We're a 4-time Grammy-winning, award-winning ensemble living in Chicago, like Melissa, and we tour the world nationally and internationally. We also teach the musicians of the ensemble teach throughout the country, and we're about to unveil a major educational initiative for next summer that I can't tell you all about, but it will be announced later this month, and I really hope that you all are excited about it when it comes out. And I'm also the founder of my own organization, which is Peter McDowell Arts Consulting, which I founded in Brooklyn in 2009. I was working for an organization in New York, left that position, decided I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I worked specifically, and I actually still do a little bit of this job, with classical musicians, composers, on 3 things: on strategic career coaching, web presence, and PR for live performances and CDs. So entrepreneurialism is a big part of what 8th Blackbird did. It was 6 musicians that met in college and created a vision, and it's also a big part of my own personal life. Thanks.
My name is Paola. I'm a composer and the founding director of National Sawdust and Vision into Art. National Sawdust gives 4 to 6 artist residencies a year. Each residency is awarded $10,000 and 17 hours of recording time. Our groups in residence are offered the same, and they're given 6 curatorial slots, and we choose them based on the projects that they're trying to develop. We have 12 curators. They're chosen for the kind of music that they present and their generosity to give back towards the field. And then we shift different partner organizations every year to kind of highlight the different emphasis and the thematic emphasis that we're exploring for the year. I run Vision into Art, which is a large-scale multimedia nonprofit that I started 20 years ago now. And my own work centers on large-scale collaboration with astrophysicists, conservationists, and my newest work is with Robert Wilson. It's a big opera based on Hemingway, and a new opera from Minnesota Opera.
Hi, I'm Jason Price. I'm an alum from across the street. I was a founding member of Alarmal Sound, also spent some time in OSEA while I was over here as well. And Alarmal Sound is a performing organization dedicated to the Sinfonietta literature, and one of the initiatives that I'm kind of proud of is their Summer New Music Festival, where we bring in 6, 7, 8 early career composers and give them great recordings and a performance. after 15 years, I hung up my Alarmal Sound sock puppet and have started kind of the second or maybe third phase of my career, teaching full-time sound design, actually at Michigan State, and doing more freelance sound design and more focus on my composition, as well as started a small business which has nothing to do with music. That's also taken up some of my time. So I'm very excited for this phase of my career and terrified.
I'm Kate Sheeran. I'm the Provost and Dean of the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, also a very proud alumna of Eastman and the Arts Leadership Program. Jason and I have Alarmal Sound roots in common. My very first administrative role was through a grant from Arts Leadership, working with Alarmal Sound, with whom I've played, and now I'm on the board. I was in New York for many years until last year. I worked at the Mannes School of Music doing lots of different kinds of programs there. And I moved to San Francisco last year to be the chief academic officer and lead the faculty in San Francisco. And innovation plays a key role for us. Many times when San Francisco is mentioned, people first think of innovation because of the tech industry there. So it's our great challenge and great pleasure to make our school reflective of our city, and in so doing, hopefully produce some of the most innovative artists out there. We do that in a number of ways. We have some new degree programs to complement our long-standing programs. We have a new program in technology and applied composition, where students are composing for visual media and electronic media for and with those elements, and partnering with places like Sony and Twitter, and working on video games and film design. We also have a brand new program in Roots Jazz and American Music that's starting next year with our partners, the SF Jazz Center. We have a connected learning initiative where we curate our academics alongside the repertoire students perform. So for instance, this semester our theme is music, politics, and social justice. So we curate our classes to demonstrate how artists have connected with that theme over time to inspire our students while they're learning that repertoire. And then in the best case scenarios, which is starting to happen, the students come up with their own projects related to that theme. We make sure that every decision we make we're thinking of students in 4 ways: as an artist, with them as an intellectual, as a professional, and especially with them as an individual, to make sure we're finding their individual voices.
Great. So we have a tremendous amount of experience and varied experience here. So let me start with the first question. All of you have been part of innovative projects. What is the hardest parts about bringing these to life? So how can we as a musical community remove barriers? So can you give example from your own experience of a case where support, tools, or resources have helped you to overcome typical obstacles?
Well, I'll take this one. So I think Paola said something really important, which is that when you are launching something new on a pretty short timeline, you have to be sort of tested in order to get the traditional sources of funding from, foundations. And, we saw with Fifth House that it took 2 or 3 years for government sources and foundations to begin to be considering us, even just due to eligibility issues. So just as an example of one project that came about for us in sort of an odd way, and it just happened last year, so this is even 10 years into our existence. A few years ago, we met a composer named Austin Wintory, who is the first composer ever to be nominated for a Grammy Award for a video game score. And I don't play a lot of video games, but the composer in our group said, "I need you to sit down for an hour and a half and play this thing." And by the end, I had cried 3 times. It was one of the most beautiful artistic experiences, made all the more awkward by the fact that our violist walked in the room as I'm streaming tears on the couch and wondered what had happened to me. But in any case, we wanted to create a fully interactive version of this show for performance, where the performers would go in real time with the actions of the player on stage. We had a pretty short timeline with which to do this. We were lucky to have some presenters who took the leap and said, "We've never seen this done before, but great." And we were lucky that National Sawdust was one of those. The thing is, though, we had a short funding gap, and instead of going to the traditional funders or individuals, we thought, you know what, let's throw this thing up on Kickstarter. And we had for many years thought about crowdfunding. We had never done it because we didn't have the right project. But for this particular one, we ended up raising our goal within 2 hours. And we had, I think, $52,000 by the end of it from 1,200 backers. Our premiere had 2,500 people at it, and National Sawdust, when we were there over the summer, was so full that we had to remove people from the first row to actually be able to reach the stage for the performance. So the thing that was interesting about this is that for the right project, we learned from this experience that it wasn't just about, you know, one funder or an institutional funder, and it also wasn't just about raising the money for the project. It was about creating a community around the project, so that everywhere we went with it, we were asking people to tell us where we should go next with their dollars, or getting them to engage with us as players on the stage. And some of the most heartfelt moments in that process have been people writing us and telling us what has been so important to them about having this game in their lives. So I guess I would say that fundraising is not so much about just the dollars exchanging hands, but about finding the right match between someone who has resources and someone who has the capacity to bring a project that both of you have a passion about to life.
Thank you for that. I love the story about weeping on the couch, and I want to hear even more about that. So I guess I wasn't thinking of saying this, but it flows nicely. 8th Blackbird has had residencies across the country at University of Richmond, Curtis, and we really struggled with a local Chicago presence because we're on the road almost all the time. And a lot of the members of our ensemble, they've been together for 20 years. They have families and kids in Chicago, and they really want to stay at least part of the year in Chicago. Plus, when you're developing a donor base, you want to have some sort of geographical center. And we've been in Chicago for about 15 years. So kind of a wonderful thing happened a couple years ago, which is that we started talking with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago about being an artist in residence there. They had only had visual artists in residence, and they had never had a performing arts group in residence, and they decided to do something, we together decided to do something very different. It wasn't a series of workshops, it wasn't a series of performances, it was 2 small art galleries, and they reserved the 2 art galleries for us for an entire year, and one of them became our rehearsal studio, so we moved our piano and percussion and everything into this art gallery and made it messy and dirty and just like a rehearsal studio would be. And the other was a kind of an exploration room where people could learn a little bit about new music, learn about our organization. But honestly, this didn't really cost either organization very much money. The museum paid us a small stipend. The museum, I mean, as a lot of contemporary art museums are, they don't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot left over, and so they paid us a small stipend. They opened up these 2 spaces to us, and we said to ourselves, what's the difference between being in our rehearsal studio behind closed doors where no one can see us, or being in this museum where it's essentially the same amount of space? And the only unknown was, would people be too obnoxious from the general public, or would they not care? We found that it was exactly in the middle. People were very engaged and very polite, and we had a great year, and it really helped with our visibility in Chicago. I think it's something that I would love for other musical organizations to think about, not only museums, but other spaces where you can kind of just set up shop for a while. And the process of opening up rehearsals to the public is very powerful, as I'm sure Paola and other people here know. So.
Are there others?
Well, I think it's important when you open it up to people coming in. I think some ensembles rehearse in ways that makes that difficult.
Sure.
Right. And I just worked in a theater that does something very similar, where the people on the board and the donors will come in to technical rehearsals. And if you don't know, the technical rehearsals are the last kind of putting all the technical aspects into the performance of a piece of theater. And in this case, it was great. 1 or 2 people were asked a lot of questions, sometimes while things were happening. But gradually, that kind of, we figured it out. But it was very powerful for those people who were supporting that particular project to see its creation and to have kind of a little piece of that.
So I'm thinking about the first part of that question again, which Paola talked about a bit when you said you've actually learned more things not to do than to do. But that question of what are the hardest parts about bringing something to life? Because I think the successes, the examples you gave are really beautiful. But what are those things where you had a dream or a vision of what you wanted to do and getting it off the ground just seemed impossible?
I'll take this one. I think that, at the beginning when I was starting to create multimedia work and it was expensive and it was, I was in my 20s, so I didn't have a lot of support. I think that the key thing was that if I didn't invest in my own work, why did I expect others to? And I think that's something that we often forget when we're very young, because we think, well, it's great and it's amazing and it's groundbreaking. Someone should support this. You should support it. A lot of the funding that I put into my projects at the beginning meant that I wasn't getting paid, meant that no matter what, there was integrity in terms of paying the artists. But that sacrifice was actually a huge part of of just laying the ground of wanting to do your own work. Otherwise, you go and you work for somebody else. If you want to be initiating your own work, you have to be able to take that responsibility. Secondly, I think there's two kinds of trajectory for work. There's short trajectories. Sometimes works can come together very quickly because there's something in the air, there's something about the work, it appeals to a large audience, you know the right donor. And sometimes you're creating a work that may take 3 to 4 years to build up to. And I think acknowledging that, that there are different sets of challenges for both those things is important. In the long trajectory type work, one of the things that I'm interested right now is and what I'm finding a lot at National Sawdust is that, when we think of funding, we think of individuals giving you money, you think of foundations giving you money, you think of corporate support, which is actually almost gone, so you shouldn't think of corporate support. And though you think of content distribution and sponsorships. And so I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about if you're creating experiential work or if you're creating, kind of multimedia work or even if you're just kind of creating the kind of music that might be able to serve on a different kind of platform, is that you can actually get money from very different types of foundations. So an example of a very short project was the Hubble, where it was a very large project. We were anticipating 2,000 people, 6,000 people showed up in the park. Luckily, Time Warner Foundation realized that this had never been done, and so they ended up giving us 6,000 glasses, which were meant to go to actually 4 different performances, and luckily we had them for that one night. But part of that project specifically was that something that hadn't been done was happening, and so we could go to sponsors that were particularly interested in the science behind it. So I think just really thinking out of the box in terms of finding support, and then fundamentally my own success in raising money has always been through individual patronage, and I think that for me has always been in a way much more authentic, because I like building relationships, I like talking to people, I like to bring people into process, and so I think building those relationships, those authentic relationships from an early place is key, because then someone supports your work, they tend to support your work more than once.
Great. You all talked about foundations. I'm wondering where you all learned how to be successful grant writers, because writing grants can be incredibly time-consuming, and like anything else, there's a lingo. One needs to understand what the right words are for a given grant or funder. So where did you learn that? Was that on-the-job training?
I'll say one word and then I'll stop talking. But 2 things. One is that there's something that's very different about marketing speak, which is about getting audiences to come to see work. And then there's something very different about foundation speak, which is really about what makes that work important. What is game-changing about it? What is, obviously you've looked at the mission guide points of the foundation, so you know that your project is in those foundation guidelines. But I think that the speak ends up coming from a place of social change or a place of what your project is doing that is groundbreaking. And so they're very different you're right, they're completely different languages.
Well, that's kind of interesting, because I was actually about to say that one of the things that I really love is creating kind of like a Bible of language surrounding something where it's like the same language that you pull from. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think I think that the language can go in different directions from grant writing to marketing, but that there has to be this core of language that's like the same language that goes on your website, and it's the same language that goes in the grant, and it's the same language that's used everywhere, because especially with a project that has a lot of different people involved, and if everyone kind of, and I find this a lot with younger or starting organizations, is that I'm like, well, what is it titled this, or is it titled this, or is it about this, or is it about this? Because a lot of people are involved and are writing different things. So it sounds like remedial, but you have to have like a core block of language that, you know, absolutely is used everywhere. And I find that to be very reassuring when you're doing things like this, because you can always go back to it and take from it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, the core of the project doesn't change. It's more about whether you're looking at it from the outside in or the inside out, and what the foundation is looking for.
Obviously, I think about all of these concepts on a daily basis earlier in the process, and how do we give these lessons to our students, and how do we give our students an incubator to figure these things out earlier. We feel very strongly that the incubator should be in school. So we should be finding time for students to write grants, to take risks, to have an incubator for a project that starts from start to finish, to bring a project to life before you have to worry about paying your rent and what people's opinions are going to be about it, and you have every resource in the school. So I think it's also partly on those of us who run schools to think of everything an artist needs when they're out in the world, and make direct connections to how students learn those skills, but also how they try them out and do them for themselves. When you think about so many of the ensembles and arts organizations that were started with an idea, usually or often you can trace it back to school, whether it's something direct like Alarm Will Sound from OSEA, or whether it's something more abstract like my friends and I started thinking about it when we were in school. So everything from grant writing to dreaming up your idea, we should be able to find a time for during a degree program.
Makes sense. So one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that the writing of the grant is like 10% of the writing of the grant. That 90% of it happens in the conceptualization of the project and really understanding what it takes to bring it to life and being able to capture that on paper. In terms of where I got those skills, I had a social studies teacher in the 10th grade who was the only jerk who gave me a C the entire time that I was in high school. And it was because he would actually sit there with everything that I wrote and put a check mark next to every real valid point I made. And sometimes there would be a lot of words and very few check marks. So the thing that's important about grant writing is that you cut out all the fluff that you would normally use in marketing speak, and you have to really understand what you're looking to do, the who, what, when, why, how, and also how you will measure and evaluate whether or not it's successful, how it aligns with the procedures or the priorities of that particular funder. And those priorities will be listed on their website, but the last thing I'll say about the grant writing process is people fund people. It's not about organizations funding organizations. So you'll often learn the most about what's important to a funding organization by talking to a person within it.
Great advice. Kate, were you going to say something else?
No, I was just going to say, and the more heartfelt your pitch about your project is, the more response you get. If you really believe in something, we've all seen it. That's when donors grab on. When it's not just, oh yeah, this is an idea someone else has. When it's your thing and coming from your heart.
Great.
Well, one more thing. When you said 10%, I thought you were going to say something else, which is that in some ways, like if you're doing an NEA grant, the narrative is 10% of it, because the other 90% is the millions and millions of attachments that you have to do.
True.
So when you start working on a grant, even small grants sometimes, do yourself a favor and start working on the attachments super early and get everything done, and the narrative you will find it's the easiest part because it flows, but the other parts take a long time. We have a wonderful intern right now, and I just had him work on a grant, and he did a draft for me, and it was very well written, but the critique that I gave him, which I would also give to people, is we only had 200 words, and it's just start with who you are, and then start with the project, and then keep going. You know, I think when he wrote it, it would kind of assumed a lot of things, and so I think when you write a grant, you have to assume no knowledge, and you have to have at least a basic, descriptions of who you are and what the basic project is, and move on from that.
That's excellent. I'm reminded both from the 200 words and the checks of valid points, the quote from Mark Twain, who wrote to a friend and said, "Please excuse the long letter. I did not have time to write a short one." So,
Yeah. The short ones are the hard ones, actually.
right.
Yeah.
So, Kate, you talked about what we should be doing in schools. And so why don't we sort of shift a little bit about what schools and other organizations should be doing. So I'm curious from your perspective, I mean, I must say when you said that 8th Blackbird is 20 years old,
20.
I still think of it as a very new ensemble. So I'm dating myself here. But so all of you have been in the world for, a good number of years now. As you see musicians coming out of music schools, what are the skills that you think they are lacking, and what should schools be doing, both universities, conservatories, but even maybe earlier? I mean, what should we be doing to prepare musicians to be successful in the world?
Oh, sorry. I don't know. Do you want to, I ran pre-college programs at Manus for a very long time, and one of the things that was so exciting was young students' openness to everything. I would walk down the hall and you'd hear someone playing Lady Gaga, and then I would walk by and they'd stop, and I was like, "No, don't stop. That's okay to play that alongside your Bach, alongside whatever else." And at some point, especially in college, a no button gets pushed, where you learn what you shouldn't like or what you shouldn't say or what you shouldn't do, and then we spend a lot of time undoing that if we're doing our jobs correctly. So I'm very interested in eliminating the no button, both for students and just for making the education better earlier on. But Paola mentioned risk-taking in her talk, and I just think that's huge because musicians are calibrated to take risks. It's why we all got into this in the first place. But so often we get very focused on winning an orchestra job or taking that opera young artist program audition or whatever the singular thing is, and we've gotten so, especially in the 20th century, musicians got so singular that we forgot about what we want to do as an artist. So I think schools have an obligation both to make sure we're inspiring students as an artist and meeting them where they are and reminding them about what their interest is, and then also giving them high-level business skills and an incubator to try out projects before they are out on their own.
It's just so great because when I was at Juilliard, I wanted to give my thesis recital in composition and multimedia, and they said flat out no. They were like, "You can't do this." So of course I did it anyway, and I totally agree. It's like the place where you should be trying everything out. But I ended up getting in a lot of trouble because it's like why get in trouble when you can just like actually say yes
Right.
and prepare somebody.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. Having said that, I think it's really important as artists to have like obstacles, because like if everything's perfect, you're also you fight against things. That's kind of part of what drives you to do things. When you talk to John Zorn, he still thinks that like everyone's against him. It's like, no, you're famous. Like everyone loves you. He's like, no, everyone hates me. Everyone's against me. So there's kind of that too, and that's human.
So I'm curious on the no, because I understand that. But for all of us, how many have really positive feelings about the place we went to school? I do. So what is it? Why do these people who, on one hand, we revere and love as our former teachers and mentors, and on the other hand, we see this attitude of no, you shouldn't explore that, you shouldn't do that. How do we break that barrier? Because we know these are great teachers and musicians and people who we love. How do we get through that? No, this should be a place where we should be free to experiment.
Yeah, that's a great question because my experience definitely echoes yours. The things that are the seed of what I do now are the things that I was told, no, you cannot do that. No, you can't make a living in chamber music. No, you cannot mix genres. No, you cannot. And I did it anyway. And I think that part of it, as a person who now teaches in higher ed, comes from a fear that that's not something perhaps that's familiar to us as a faculty, right? So maybe you say no because you don't feel like you have the resources within your own experience to guide somebody along that path. Maybe you say no because you don't have the time, because everyone's overextended. And as we talk with faculty and administrators from many different schools, that's the number one thing that comes up is we don't have time. We don't have time to do the individual mentorship of this project. We don't have time to add that course. We don't have time for students to be going out and doing these things. And then there's also the thing that where a lot of these projects come from students whose minds are open to ideas that haven't yet entered higher education. And to be able to follow that curiosity is a very powerful thing. So in a certain way, as a faculty, we have to be willing to learn alongside and be willing to take those risks and engage our own curiosity as well to explore what if, which is a scary place to be, but nonetheless very worthwhile.
One of my favorite things about being in Alarmal Sound for the time I was there was that there was somebody in that group that knew a style really well. So a few of us could play jazz together, and a few of other people could play rock together. And for me, that actually speaks to why I ended up coming to Eastman anyway. And it was a lot of different kind of cabinets that I could go to without necessarily having to worry about whether my teacher, Jim Thompson, cared that I was playing weird stuff at the Bug Jar or something like that. You know, it was okay, and I could keep those kind of cloistered. And I got to play a lot of jazz, and I got to play a lot of new music, and I got to play a lot of classical. And it's only informed me, it's never been a problem as a trumpet player to have those skills. Jim Thompson he's a very, he's a great orchestra player, but I remember him saying to the studio class that even if you're principal of wherever, there's going to be that day when they bring somebody in and you're going to have to play 12 bars of blues, and you're going to look like an idiot if you can't just play one chorus of 12-bar blues. And so he would emphasize that you at least do that. Just get through one chorus. But Eastman was a great place for that. And I do see, when I go around and see musicians coming out of schools, that is something that I want. I want to see them not just be comfortable in one language, but to be able to branch out into other languages, because I fear for them if they can't, if they don't have that ability. And not just as, freelance musicians around town, not just that, but like as creative artists without that grasp of kind of different languages.
I agree with all that, especially about branching out to different kinds. I mean, I think even in 8th Blackbird, the musicians are trying new music that they've never tried before, that verges into world music and pop, and so I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that I would say is I feel like every music school should have some kind of entrepreneurship program, whether it's a course or guest lectures or something. I think probably a lot of you know of Angela Miles Beeching and her book Beyond Talent. I would recommend that for everybody. But there's so much to learn for music students in the entrepreneurship category. And through my consulting business, I met a lot of clients who were very talented musicians, but they were in their 30s, and I said, do you have a website? No, I don't have a website. You have some photos, and they said, well, yeah, they're about 10 years old. So like you start seeing these patterns where or you say, what do you do? Well, I play Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. So you get a lot of people like that. Like, it's not a few people, it's a lot of people like that. And I think that if you learn when you're young that, like, yes, you need a website, you need a really good website, yes, you need amazing photos, and yes, you need to change those photos every 2 or 3 years, even if you don't think you do, and yes, you need to have exciting programs that you tour around. This is stuff that's super crucial.
Kate.
Okay.
And just that a particular word that you used, I think, was really important, which was entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And that's what's, I think, is great about this program, is that leadership has always been in the title. Leadership, entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And I've done consulting for a few different universities that have started arts administration programs. And that word to me is already, it feels like, you're just dusting the sculptures off. You're just maintaining art. And that's, I think that's less valuable than entrepreneurship and to create new venues and to create new potential for arts.
Just three quick thoughts. When we're thinking about schools, it's definitely not all on the private teachers, and I recognize that private teachers still have to do much of the same work that has been done for centuries, and it's necessary because everybody has to play at the highest level, and the level of virtuosity keeps going up, which is great. So that coupled with openness for hearing what students are interested in really is a winning formula, I think. And then the school institutionally can do a lot of things. I think often about the space in between. So when we start a new program, what often happens is that while that program is still getting settled and we're not sure exactly how all the degree requirements will line up with the other degree requirements and things like that, the students have taken off. They've already made a project. You know, we had our opening weekend a few weeks ago. The orchestra played John Adams and Beethoven on Saturday night, and many of the same students played in the technology and applied composition concert and improvised with electronics the next day. And I was thrilled because it shouldn't be weird. You should be able to do all those things, and it will equip you to do all kinds of things. And then the other thing I just want to touch on is entrepreneurship. Music schools and the world in general is really big on the word entrepreneurship, and it's great. And sometimes we mean it literally, so you're an entrepreneur who's starting your own business, and sometimes we mean it in the spirit of entrepreneurship. And I just want to advocate for, I'm sure many of you are leaders in arts organizations in the country, but as Paola and my colleagues here demonstrate, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be a leader in a freestanding, in a long-standing arts organization, and also an artist, and also a musician. And we need interesting thinkers and musicians to be in leadership positions in institutions that already exist with that entrepreneurial spirit. So I just want to empower everybody to please also apply that to those jobs, because we all need great colleagues in the field.
So I'm going to ask one last question, and then I really want to devote the rest of the time to you asking questions. But I want to go back to the idea of innovation, and I am thinking about the work that you have all done as artists. And most of it, I would say, is new and contemporary and cutting edge. And when I think of innovation, that's often what I think about. As a leader at a university, as an arts administrator, I sometimes get frustrated because at a university, what we always talk about is what's next, what's new, the new building. The next new building. Yet, much of what we do isn't necessarily new. How does somebody who says, my dream is to be in a string quartet, how can they be innovative, still both perhaps doing contemporary music, but because they love Beethoven? What are the innovative strategies to go out in the world and be a successful traditional musician, and even our orchestras? Besides, I look at programming and I see more and more video game concerts, which last year it was the one concert the ARPU sold out, was when they programmed a video game, which is fantastic. But what are the innovative strategies to also make certain people still appreciate Sibelius and great music like that?
That's a great question. I think with our organization, we don't silo those things off. So when we did our graphic novel project, it included the Brahms Horn Trio alongside newly commissioned works, and it was brought together by story. So when you're experiencing that, it goes seamlessly from one thing to the other because there's this story that is taking you through. But I would say that it's about figuring out a way that what you do connects with other people, and thinking about that in ways that are really different from the way you would think about it here, perhaps in a very traditional environment. What I would say is this, like, here's a good example of an organization that came to the same end, but by completely different means. So a few weeks ago, I met Stan Thompson, who runs Play on Philly. And that's an organization that is a Sistema-inspired youth program for kids, learning how to play instruments. And so in their early days, they thought, well, they're going to help make kids smarter, they're going to help make them more happy, and they're also going to teach them to play music. So they would do things like okay, most of the kids in this program have, their background is not in classical music, so we're going to try and play music that connects more closely to them, so popular styles. Or maybe we'll have them play on rhythm instruments and do fun things in the classroom. And then they hired a research firm called Wolf Brown, who came in and actually assessed through brain scans what they were really doing for their kids. And what they found was that they actually were not accomplishing anything at all with regards to happiness or making the kids smarter. What they were accomplishing was executive functioning skills, and they were measuring that by having the kids play video games for a few hours a couple times a year, which assessed those skills on a brain scan. But here's where things get really interesting. They found that they only achieved those skills when they were learning how to hold a viola properly and playing classical music and being held to the very highest artistic standard. So the things that we would have the instincts to do as traditional musicians, as traditional teachers, found a completely new meaning and purpose in those studies, which allowed them to get funding to the tune of, $2.2 million a year from organizations not focused in the arts, from organizations that are in education and health and human services and social services. So that's an example of recontextualizing something that is very much our skill set without changing it, but for a totally different reason.
Great story. Any other thoughts?
Just a quick note, Melissa's story touches on something where Stan is a great example. I mean, he's a trumpet player, he went to Curtis, he loves orchestral music. He's not necessarily looking to expand the genre or things like that, but what he's doing is using music for a social cause and to build community. So he's using music as a tool for something that's important to him. And I think anytime you do that and it's really authentic and you tell the story well and you demonstrate it and you make an impact, no matter the genre, no matter the repertoire, that's when it's most effective and most important.
Yeah, I wanted to leap on that idea of authenticity, because I think, you see several different examples in the field. I just want to give a few of them. Like, for example, you have the Chiara Quartet, and they're amazing, and they do, pretty much traditional rep, but they do it in such a great way, and they memorize their work, and they have what works for them, and there's a commitment to the repertoire, but they're constantly thinking one step ahead in terms of how to play that repertoire, how to get new audiences. It's very clear, it's very clean, and they're doing it very well. And I think that's a really positive thing. Right now, you take like the New York Philharmonic and their new tenure, and it's a really big shift that they're going to take, right? Which is a shift away from new music, a reconcentration on the classics with their new music director coming in, and then Babe the Pig, to bring in new audiences. Is that going to work? I'm not sure. I mean, I think that's a really deep question, is like, how do you bring a new audience? It's absolutely okay to say, we're the orchestra that does these standards, we've got to do them the best we can, but there still is the question of how do you bring in new music? And I think the thing that all organizations always have to be thinking of, no matter how big or how small you are, is that you always have to be thinking one step ahead. And that's just, I think that's really, really hard to do, but you can't ever get comfortable, because the minute you're comfortable, the reality is you're not really looking to what context you're living in. And a last example of that is what happened with El Sistema at Carnegie Hall just this, was it last night or 2 nights ago, which is that 10 years ago when El Sistema was playing, and it was like this extraordinary burst of energy and of youth, and of course, there are all the amazing things that El Sistema does so well, was regarded very differently from what it was, last night, when what's happening in Venezuela, and how that system is suffering so much, and how the people are suffering so much. So all of a sudden, the same program that was so extraordinary years ago falls flat. Why? Well, why not? Because people read the news and people know what's going on, and people want the arts to be a reflection of today. So, I think the difficult thing as being an engaged artist, arts leader, thinker, is that you can't ever stop. And I think that's just has to be in your DNA. Has to be like a constant question of, where am I? Why am I doing this? How can I do it in a way that's authentic?
Great answer.
Just in terms of art that is old, for lack of a better word. And when I'm thinking about that, I also think about the field of ceramics, and it doesn't get, that's an ancient form of art. And I recently saw John Glick's retrospective of his entire life, who's a ceramic artist. And I got to go to his workshop and talk to him a little bit, but looking at, he's gone through different phases of work, just like any creative artist would. But still dealing with basically mud, right? It's still pretty much mud and water. And hand building, but seeing that art, which has its roots in ancient history, and then seeing some other little things sitting around his workshop, and I started to ask what they were, and they were tools that he built himself. He invented these little, cutters that have ribbons on them, and they would make these different patterns in the clay. And then I went home to practice, and I looked at the wall of mutes that I have, all built by somebody else, and not knowing what they really do, right? And thinking, wow, this is an artist who's taken, something that's older than what I'm playing, and already innovated it by just making his own tools, or just experimenting with his own tools. So experimenting in a way that I didn't even think about, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, I think about this all the time with our students, and the fact that there's a stereotype that unfortunately still exists, that all of our students come because they want to become principal players in orchestras. I think that is so far from the truth. When I look at any one group of our students, the flute studio, the violin studio, they do not want the same thing. They want very different things. But there are those who still do love the classics, and that's what they want to do. And how we can innovate that, as well as cutting-edge, new, exciting projects, is a challenge I think we still face. So,
I
Kate.
just want to add one anecdote. I was just thinking of last year, Tim Higgins, who's the principal trombone of the San Francisco Symphony, and he also teaches at the conservatory, gave a talk to students. And he talked about how his singular focus for most of his life, and that he was very fortunate to have the job he has. But once he was in that job, realized it was fulfilling in many ways, but there was another whole side of him as an artist that he still wanted to explore. And for him, that's become composing and commissioning work and doing arrangements for a lot of groups. So he was encouraging students who wanted to have that track and that singular focus, to make sure that they also have a breadth of experiences and interests. So they're, again, nothing's mutually exclusive.
It's great, and I would say that, especially as I speak with our alumni who are in Los Angeles, studio musicians, I mean, the word that they just keep coming back to over and over is versatility.
Right.
So 2 nights ago, we had one of the great trombonists in the country, Jim Pugh, performed a concerto with the Wind Ensemble. Unbelievable. I assume there are trombonists in the audience who thought, oh my gosh. Last night he played with Steely Dan. Not at the Bug Jar, but pretty close to a venue like that. So again, versatility is still a key word. So why don't we?
Can I just say one more thing
Yeah.
to the innovation question? I think that what it all comes down, in some ways what it all comes down to is bringing people inside the experience. And I often tell people I have a lifelong love and involvement in opera, but it started because I was a little kid in a children's chorus, and I sang in opera. And so being inside the opera was amazing, and I don't think I would love opera as much as I did if I hadn't been inside of it. And I think that no matter what the work of it, like you said, Sibelius or 8th Blackbird has done, we don't only do living composers. We've done Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire quite a bit, and some other stuff. But I think it's about figuring out ways to put the audience inside the experience. I think the Chiara Quartet example is really interesting. We started doing memorization and movement 20 years ago. We've actually moved a little bit away from that because one little secret is that apparently when you get older, it's harder to memorize things. So I'm like, why aren't you guys memorizing things anymore? But movement and memorization go hand in hand, and they go hand in hand because if you memorize something and you don't have music stands, of course your body's going to want to move. I think, I'm not saying that every ensemble needs to memorize and move, but it's definitely something that people should experiment with. And I think that is an example of something that brings people inside the experience. My experience about being in the opera, obviously not everybody can be in the opera, but there's ways of drawing people into that experience.
Great. So where is Steve Daniel in the magic microphone? There it is.
The children's book.
Great. What are your questions?
Hello. So our society is on an unstoppable journey, moving away from the physical world and going into the digital world. I mean, we see that all the time with young generations literally living on their smartphones and tablets and so on and so forth. So my question to you is, what kind of strategies are you guys implementing or thinking about to promote and to give visibility to good music in the digital world, especially knowing that there is so much noise out there in the digital world? Everybody can have a cloud account. Anybody can use GarageBand and compose pseudo music and put music products that are, not really that interesting. So how can we protect good musicians and good music and have a good footprint in the digital world that we cannot escape?
I have a short answer. I just jumped in. Did I?
No.
Okay, sorry. I don't know that this is the answer in total to your question, but I'll tell you why that doesn't worry me as much on a daily basis, because I'm so informed by students and young musicians, and so inspired by them. And last year, when interviewing undergraduate applicants to the school, I started to ask each of them what's on your playlist. And I made sure to go first so that I said a range of things, from pop music to new music to Baroque music, all kinds of things, so that they would feel a little less nervous. And the result of that, over 2 months of auditions, was the most interesting playlist I've ever heard. And part of that is because we can access all kinds of music all over the world all the time. And so I think that's actually, the opposite is also true. Because we can be inspired by somebody on the other side of the world, it's also informing us as artists. So there are pros and cons, was my only little snapshot there.
That's for sure. I would say the group that we're working with from Israel, we found them because my husband likes to waste a lot of time on Facebook late at night. And I think of it as wasting time, but at the end, what he really is finding our best collaborators. And he found this bass player from Israel who was like, oh my God, listen to this guy play, emails him, and the guy says, hey, I'm gonna be in Chicago in 3 weeks with my band. So that became the start of a 3-year project. The other thing that I'll say is with the video game project that I mentioned, our argument on Kickstarter for why this was important was that we spend so much time accessing music and video games and all these things in a solitary, in your living room kind of way. And this is a way to actually take something that was originally experienced in electronic form and bring it back to real life. So in a certain kind of way, our superpower as musicians too is reminding people of the importance of human connection.
Yeah, I worry a lot about it actually, because I think, first of all, I think spending a lot of time online really hinders your creative process. So I think about it very differently when I'm writing music, where it's like, I can't do that, otherwise I can't focus, to everything from the dissemination of music, which is really important for emerging artists, but then actually collecting royalties and streaming, and where does that money show up, and where does it go, and who owns it. And I think that's really, it's really critical, and we're still trying to figure it out. We actually are completely set up for streaming, and we haven't started it yet because I'm not ready to do that yet. And even when you talk to sponsorships, for example, a young group will be much more willing to give up creative ownership because of the benefits that they'll get from the exposure. And we have to protect them, because at the end of the day, we shot something which was for this football thing called March Madness, which I don't watch March Madness, but this young group came in and did this thing, and then all of a sudden it was on the television on thousands of commercials, and they paid $4,000 and the artist got nothing. And it's we had to actually create a much better contract, and it was our fault. So point being, you should all read, if you guys don't know about this amazing new journal, it's called The Creative Independent. It's run by this amazing thinker named Brandon Stusoy. He used to be the lead editor of Pitchfork. And he does one article a day, and it dives into radically different things. And the last one was about authorship, and it's Philip Glass talking about authorship of his music. And there's one line which I really love, which is he basically owns all of his music, which I really believe in. And he says, the only things that I don't own are the film scores, and they're not gifts. They paid heftily for it. And so I think, as artists, we have to be very careful of the way, I think it's a very positive thing, don't get me wrong. I am on social media and do use it, and we think about it in the space. But I do think there's a lot to think about. It's a really deep question.
I think even though people are buried in their cell phones and media, I have heard, and I believe this is true, that people still believe young people love coming together and they love community. And this is very clear to me. We've started playing at, I guess what you'd call kind of rock festivals. I mean, we played at a festival called Eau Claire this summer, and we played at Big Ears, which is really a kind of a combination classical music, contemporary music, and rock festival. Tons of young people who never heard anything like what we do, just sitting on the floor, you know, enraptured. Same at the MCA. We had young people sitting on the floor for 3 hours straight watching us rehearse. So I think that I think there's validity in what you're saying, but I also think that there's a lot of young people who buck the trend and who love to just be together in one place and experience music or performance. The video for National Sawdust, I think, was incredibly inspiring. I mean, it looks like people getting together to enjoy lots of different kinds of music is certainly not dead in your venue. You know, so.
Yeah, I'd also like just to offer 3 thoughts on the technology question. I remember as a student here 30 years ago or more, the director then, Robert Freeman, talking about how baseball got it right and music hasn't. And I happen to like football, so I'll use football. And that if you watch football on Sunday on a technology on TV, it's a very different experience than attending it live. It doesn't try to replicate it. It's a different experience. And where Bob Freeman used to say they have it all over music is they educate the audience. They don't just say it was a fastball. They said they throw it low and inside because this is a weakness of that particular hitter, and you become a more educated audience. So it was a use of technology to enhance the live experience. The second thing I'd say is Jim talked about the Eastman Saxophone Project performance of Rite of Spring. If you haven't seen it online, you should see it. I would tell you it's 15% of the experience of actually being there live. It's just such a different experience. And I hope that as performing musicians, that live experience is something that decades from now, centuries from now, people will still be coming together, because the live experience is nothing like a technological experience. They're different. And the third thought I'd have is just simply, I think about sort of how libraries have changed. Libraries used to be where you went to get information. Today, very few people go to libraries to get information. They have transformed themselves to the place where people come together to collaborate. So because of technology, that still is an important thing, but its role has changed. And I think it's a question of how do we learn to use technology either for its own sake and the art that you can create in technology, or to enhance the live acoustic experience. And I don't think we're anywhere near figuring that out yet. So.
Yeah, I would say that at Michigan State, we just changed our library to be very similar to that, including rooms where people are playing video games, because we've been given the world's largest collection of video games just recently. And there are university libraries, which are very dear and near to my heart, that are becoming more, just like you said, places to come together. And getting the book part of it is walking up to the desk and then somebody goes and gets the book. So the stacks are disappearing, which is sad to me, but I get it, I understand it. But in terms of augmenting the experience, I think that really is really important. I went to a football game not so long ago where it was a really great live experience, but I was having trouble, I was like, how come the line of scrimmage doesn't light up on the field? And I don't know what down it is. And I didn't know where to look, because I'm so, I'm used to having all of that information now. And when I see concerts where everybody's filming it, I think, well, geez, if everybody's filming it, why are you filming it? And, they're closer, you're in the back, so why are you wasting your time filming this experience? And I thought, well, what if that phone, instead of just filming the experience, maybe you could film it for everybody, but that could give you some kind of, augment your experience, because then it's just recording this experience, and then you have, I guess, that memory. I don't know if people go back and listen to those or not, but I think as a tool, I think that's a really great idea, to be able to augment that. I've always wanted that at a football game. So.
Why don't we move on? I saw lots of hands before, so there's whoever can get the mic to someone. There you go.
Hi, I'm wondering if any of you can offer insight or advice to young people entering the freelance scene, kind of always taught to pursue that singular thing that you were talking about, like the orchestra job, or that kind of very tangible success, and kind of bridging the gap between a more entrepreneurial freelance life and the very traditional orchestra freelance life.
Well, the biggest piece of advice I have is your network is your greatest currency. And recognize that getting to know people is not just something that's nice to do, but a central part of your job, especially if what you're looking to do is freelance. Every major opportunity I've ever gotten has come through a person that I knew, and that's not cheating, that's doing my job. So that's the number one thing I would say. And then also, we're at a really kind of beautiful point right now where you can really define what your success is. So this is both a message for, faculty and administration as much as it is for people like you who are about to embark on this, which means that, when I left school and I did the orchestra thing for a while, and I would still every summer go back and play in an orchestra with really wonderful professional musicians for 3 weeks every summer, playing 9 full symphony programs in that time. And when I stopped taking professional auditions because Fifth House was growing, they would look at me like I had leprosy for the first couple of years. And then gradually they would say, "Can I take you to lunch? I really want to learn how to fill in the blank." So that is changing out there for you, which is great, which means that there will be a legitimacy to the type of success that you're looking for. So be unafraid and get to know people.
Any other advice?
That was perfect.
It's pretty perfect. That was great.
I mean, kind of the freelancer code, or what we all talk about, is good music, good people, good money. And sometimes they don't all line up. And especially at the beginning of your career, saying yes to more things than not is always great. And you might learn, I never want to do that again, but you've tried it. And the things that bring in money and bring connections might not yet feed your soul. And so make sure you're playing music with your friends and doing things that inspire you and going to see other people play music. And eventually they line up.
Be on time and be exceptionally nice.
I'll tell you one thing, that because my teacher is in the room, so I remember, again, a few years ago, many years ago, Ray said, if you go to New York, don't worry, our network, the Eastman Mafia, they'll help you out. They'll throw you bones. They'll get you your first job. The second job is on you. And he said, what you have to recognize is the fact that there are 100 people who will play the notes in tune in the right time with a beautiful sound. What else do you bring to the gig? So I think that's what they've been talking about the whole time. What do you bring that's going to separate you from everyone else out there? Other questions?
Hi, I kind of wanted to go back to the concept of digital age. I think that in the 21st century, with so much information coming through, it's become easier for laymen to perceive music more as just a consumable, especially with something like Spotify and Apple Music, where you can just go online and pick a playlist that says party music, and then you put on the music. So more and more you come to people and you ask, what kind of music do you like? And they say, I don't really listen to music. It's something that's on in the car, something that I play to make the scene happening. And I'm curious, as a music innovator, especially maybe as someone interested in contemporary music, how you push back at that, yet preserve your integrity as a musician, but still make money. It's a really tough field out there, and it just maybe a twofold question. One about the current music scene within the layman community, and one as a personal innovator as a musician.
Sure, I'll take it. It's a good question. I think that in terms of music in the layman community, I do think about that, because a lot of the people that come to Sawdust, especially for the late night work, don't necessarily know a lot about music. And I think that it's our job as small institutions and as large institutions to put a name back on that and to really honor it. And so A lot of the way that we think about curating is always artist first in terms of, you know, Jeffrey Ziegler presents so-and-so, or Nico Muhly presents this. And the truth is, someone might not know who Nico or Jeff is, but we're putting those names out there. We're putting our marketing money behind it. We're putting our steam behind it. And I think it's just, you know, it's important work to do. And the other thing I'll say is that we had a really interesting night where we had Chiara on one part of the program, and then later we had this really great artist named Kimbra. And Kimbra's audience didn't know Chiara, and Chiara's audience didn't know Kimbra, and that was the whole point of like the way we programmed it. And there was a really good overlap of people who, you know, could kind of in some way see certain very abstract connections. So I think we're thinking about it all the time at Sawdust, but it's a very good question, and I think the best way to do it is one step at a time, adding value to name and really, you know, trying to add dignity to it.
I think video too. I mean, every project should have a budget for video, and that's something that we learned very recently, that you could do the most amazing stuff, but if you can't just show people a little bit about what you did, what you're doing, that penetrates really, really well. So I mean, now we're just trying to, you know, it doesn't have to be like complicated, crazy video, but I mean, just think about the effect of, I keep mentioning it, but that National Sawdust video that we just saw, I mean, that took a lot of hours of video footage and condensed it into just a couple minutes, but I think that does a lot to really bring people in, and I think a lot, again, going back to my consulting, a lot of my clients just have like zero video and zero concept of how to do it, and you know, it doesn't have to be complicated, but just start doing it, start taking it.
I think a lot of people feel invisible in classical music. Like, I think that's something, I think about that a lot. Like, for example, I think it's really, you know, it's a real crime when you look at a stage and the people on stage don't represent the community that you're in, and the entire stage is white. Like, that just can't happen anymore. There's no excuse for it. If you don't see people on stage who remind you of the life that you live every day, then why do you expect people to care and to remember a name and to be curious? So, I mean, in that sense, that's the activist strain. I think what we all have to do is be very conscious of the choices we make. We can't, you just can't make choices anymore that aren't intelligent.
Great. How about somebody on that side of the room? Any questions? There was one here. You had a question? Yeah. Okay. Close enough. Yeah, you're close.
I think I'm a rarity in this room because I'm a full-time arts administrator and I've never been a working musician. And a couple of threads that I've picked up through the talk and some of the questions that I wanted to point out from where I sit as someone who hires musicians and composers, because I work with a group that commissions heavily, is musicians who are either looking to be hired or composers who are looking to be given acknowledgement, sending us pitches. I get emails every day from musicians who want to perform with us and composers who want to perform with us or have their work done. They can't write. They just can't write, and I have a bias because I went to school for journalism. But even just simple things like bios, all the way up to grant writing, there's just a little bit of siloing, and I don't like that term, but it's such a buzzword these days. Students who come out of conservatory or come out of commissioning programs, or composition programs rather, they come to me, and a lot of times I have interns who come right out of school, so 22 years old, out of undergrad, and I end up spending more time with them workshopping their copywriting and their grant writing than anything else we do, because they just haven't been given basic technical writing experience. And when we're sort of triaging all of the emails that come in from people who want to be hired or work with us, the ones that are written well go to the top. And so that's always my top advice for people, just because before we even hear you or have a chance to open your attachments and see your sheet music, we have to be able to get through your cover letter.
I work with Bobby here, but I went to engineering school at Northeastern in Boston, and they have since introduced a collaboration between the English writing program and the engineering program, so that the engineers get that skill as well. I think it's a similar situation.
I teach a class of 350 students, a general education course in the Western theater. And it's not just the kids in the arts that can't write.
No,
it's a lot of them. Some of them are English majors, actually.
Yeah.
So it's a larger problem, I think, than just what you're referring to. But it's something that we need to address for sure. Yeah, I see it on a pretty daily basis.
I would echo that. First of all, I really appreciate your saying that directly.
Yeah.
And I would say that we have all seen that and experienced that. I certainly see it in hiring faculty and cover letters. I put a lot of stock in not only how it's written, but recognizing what you need to sell is not what you are, but how you meet the institution's needs.
Yes.
They have something that they're advertising a job because they have needs. You need to position yourself for that. And the other thing I'd say is, just one little piece of it. I know here we've really realigned our writing program to try to support students, but I meet with a freshman every year and I tell them I have very few regrets in life, but if I had to do it again, I would take every writing course I could have as an undergraduate, because I never imagined how much of my life would be focused on writing. And as a performing musician, if you're trying to get your ensemble out there, you are going to be the person who's writing. And I hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears. But I agree. I think institutionally, for music schools, it is an important element for us to hear.
We've been talking about professional development skills and skills as an artist and learning different genres and expanding boundaries. But schools would be very remiss in not addressing that from the writing and humanities and the academic side as well. So we've just flipped our curriculum to start with intensive writing in the first year to address that. So then you can talk about a topic in an informed, well-constructed way. It's not the only answer, but it's definitely part of the conversation, and we just have to build it in so that every time we're talking about skills for musicians, that writing is part of it, and above a lot of other things. I agree with you. Thanks. Yeah, and we need to keep saying it, so thank you for continuing to say it.
Also, I think that writing is a muscle, and so the more you do it, the better you get. So I think that people should, I'm sort of saying the flip side, which is just people shouldn't get discouraged if you don't like writing or if you're not a good writer. Then if you just keep doing it and keep doing it, certainly with a teacher or with a course that is perfect, but even if you're alone, I went from a career where I really didn't write very much to a career where I had to do a ton of writing, and I started noticing that I was gaining writing muscles just from doing it and doing it and doing it, and I think that can happen with anyone.
Just like practicing.
Yeah, it's like practicing. Yeah.
Well, I started by mentioning the weather. I would tell you that as I meet with the students, I actually start with pictures of snow and saying, you might as well embrace the weather. Complaining about it isn't going to change it, so figure out how to enjoy it. Followed by a kid pulling his hair out because of papers. And I said, embrace writing papers. This is where you're going to learn one of your key skills. So complaining about it won't make them go away. So we might as well embrace it and really learn from it.
It's necessary. I think one of the things that's coming across in all of these questions is how do you communicate effectively about what it is that you do, whether it's through, how you choose to share your music online, through video, through writing, and then also speaking. A lot of musicians, when you take the instrument away from them, forget every performance skill they ever learned. So it's important to have as much practice as possible, speaking to large groups of people or speaking to individual people that you will meet in an elevator somewhere or at a place like this, saying hello, saying your name, talking about what you do.
Beautiful.
Oh, sorry. There's one thing that I absolutely wanted to say, which is that, and I'm sure it's true of Fifth House as well. Every single member of 8th Blackbird is a great musician, but they all have to have administrative skills, and they all have to have strong administrative skills. And we just hired a new flutist last year, and she's an amazing flutist, and she's beautiful, and she's got great stage presence, but she's got killer administrative skills. And if it hadn't been for that, that's part of the whole package for musicians. So even if it's not your primary focus, administrative skills are where it's at.
Fantastic. So thank you all for your insights. Thank you all for a very good morning. Please join me in thanking them. And I'll turn it over to you.
And just a reminder that we start again with another terrific panel of new panelists at 1:30, and we look forward to seeing you right here after lunch. So thank you very much.